Look at him, Richard Overton. 112 years of life wrapped in the blue smoke of a cigar. He sits on his porch, feeling the warm afternoon sun, listening to the wind in the trees. It is a perfect, silent peace. But in the blink of an eye, the silence shatters. The sky rips open with the scream of sirens and the deafening roar of hell dropping from the clouds. In a split second, the world is nothing but fire, twisted steel, and screams. The ocean isn't blue anymore. The water was red. Overton survived a century to tell the tale, but there was another man, a ghost in the forest, a hero the history books tried to erase. He didn't have 100 years. He had 4 days, alone, surrounded. 119 German soldiers were hunting him, and all he needed to slaughter an entire battalion was a simple box of matches. The cold in the Hurtgen forest didn't just bite. It gnawed at the bone. It was November 1944, a place the soldiers called the Green Hell, where the trees were so dense that day turned into twilight and twilight turned into a pitch-black tomb. The air wasn't just freezing. It was heavy with the smell of wet pine, rotting leaves, and the metallic tang of old blood. In this frozen nightmare, silence was more terrifying than gunfire, because silence meant they were hunting you. And in the shattered remains of a bell tower, high above the muddy, mine-filled ground, sat one man. He was a statue carved from exhaustion and resolve, his breath puffing out in small white clouds that he desperately tried to suppress. He shouldn't have been there. By all the rules of the United States Army in 1944, this man shouldn't have been looking through the scope of a high-precision rifle. He shouldn't have been the last line of defense. He shouldn't have been a killer of elite status because he was black. In the eyes of the generals back in Washington, his job was supposed to be driving trucks, digging latrines, or cooking rations. The military doctrine of the time said men like him lacked the discipline, the intelligence, and the courage for combat. They were segregated, pushed to the side, treated as second-class citizens in uniforms they were dying to wear. But the war doesn't care about segregation. Bullets don't check the color of your skin before they tear through you. And on this God-forsaken ridge, the war had stripped away all the politics and left only the raw, brutal math of survival. His unit had been hammered. Artillery had turned the ground into a lunar landscape of craters and mud. The order had come down to retreat, to pull back and regroup before the German counteroffensive wiped them off the map. Panic is contagious, and when a line breaks, it usually shatters. Men ran. Equipment was dropped. The chaos of withdrawal is where armies die. But amidst the scrambling boots and the shouting officers trying to organize the chaos, this one soldier didn't run back. He climbed up. He volunteered to stay behind. It was a suicide mission, plain and simple. Someone had to cover the retreat. Someone had to make the Germans believe that the American line was still holding strong, that a full platoon was still dug in, waiting to rain fire on anyone foolish enough to cross the clearing. He dragged his rifle, his ammunition, and a few meager supplies up the crumbling stairs of the observation post. Now he was the only thing standing between a retreating American company and a ferocious German advance. He was alone in a country that wanted him dead, fighting for an army that didn't want him there. The irony wasn't lost on him, but there was no time for bitterness. There was only the scope. Below him, the fog began to shift. It was a thick, gray curtain that distorted sound and vision. He could hear them before he saw them, the crunch of jackboots on frozen twigs, the soft, guttural commands in German, the clinking of gear. It wasn't just a patrol. It was a wave. Through the optics of his rifle, the gray shapes began to resolve into men, experienced, hardened Wehrmacht soldiers. They moved with the confidence of predators who knew their prey was wounded and fleeing. They thought the village was theirs for the taking. They thought the Americans were gone. The sniper adjusted his position, the rough stone of the tower scraping against his uniform. His heart hammered against his ribs, a rhythmic drum of adrenaline, but his hands were steady, rock steady. He scanned the tree line. There, an officer. You could tell by the way he walked, the way the others deferred to him, the crispness of the uniform, even in the filth of the forest. This was the head of the snake. Standard military doctrine says you take the shot. You kill the officer, you sow confusion, you buy time. The crosshairs settled over the officer's chest. It was a perfect shot, a guaranteed kill. The trigger broke cleanly under the pressure of his finger, just waiting for that final ounce of force. But he didn't shoot. The logic of the battlefield screamed at him to fire, to start the fight, but a deeper, cunning instinct held him back. If he fired now, he kills one man, just one. The muzzle flash would reveal his position. The crack of the rifle would echo, and within seconds every German machine gun and mortar in the valley would zero in on this tower. He would be dead in minutes, and the German advance would continue over his corpse. He needed to be more than a soldier. He needed to be an army. He needed to be a ghost. Slowly, deliberately, he took his finger off the trigger. He eased back from the scope. The wind howled outside, masking the sound of his movement. He reached into his pocket. His hand bypassed the extra clips of ammunition. It bypassed the distinct shape of his knife. His fingers closed around something small, rectangular, and made of cardboard. He pulled it out, a simple box of matches. In the middle of the greatest war in human history, facing a battalion of heavily armed enemies, his weapon of choice wasn't the gun. Not yet. He looked at the matchbox, a small smile touching his lips, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The Germans were playing checkers, advancing in straight lines. He was about to play 4D chess. He opened the box. The game was about to begin. He dumped his pockets onto the rough, splintered floorboards of the observation post. The inventory of his survival was pathetic. A few clips of .3006 ammunition, the brass casings cold against his skin, a half-eaten bar of chocolate that had frozen solid, a canteen of water that was mostly ice, and the matchbox. He stared at the scattered rounds, doing the mental arithmetic that every sniper knows better than their own name. There were perhaps 150 rounds, maybe less. Down in the valley, an entire German battalion was moving into position. That meant hundreds of men, trucks, maybe light armor. If he fired 1-to-1, he would run dry before he killed half of them, and that was assuming he didn't miss. In the chaos of combat, with adrenaline shaking your hands and mortar shells exploding around you, nobody shoots 100%. The math didn't add up. If he played this like a soldier, he died. If he played it like a hero, he died. He had to play it like a mathematician. He moved to the window, keeping low, moving with the slow, fluid grace of a stalking cat. He didn't look at the trees. He looked at the geometry of death. To a civilian, it was a forest. To him, it was a grid of angles, windage, and elevation. He identified the choke points, a fallen log where they would have to step over, a clearing where the mud would slow their boots, a narrow path between two boulders. These were his kill boxes. He memorized the distances. 200 yards to the creek, 350 to the tree line, 400 to the bend in the road. He adjusted the scope, dialing in the settings, pre-calculating the drop of the bullet. But the rifle was only half the equation. The other half was the deception. He took the matchbox and began his preparations. This wasn't about lighting a fire for warmth. It was about lighting a fire for misdirection. He knew that the moment he fired, the muzzle flash, that split-second burst of light from the barrel would give him away. The German counter-snipers would be scanning the windows, waiting for that flash. So he created ghosts. He set up positions that weren't there, using the matches, bits of slow-burning fabric, and dry tinder positioned at different windows and cracks in the masonry. He rigged rudimentary decoys. If he could time it right, a flare-up 10 feet to his left would draw their eyes and their fire, while he remained invisible in the shadows to the right. It was a gamble on human reflexes. He was betting his life that the Germans would shoot at the first flash they saw. He crawled back to his primary position, nestled deep in the darkest corner of the room, far back from the window frame to hide his own flash. Now there was nothing left to do but breathe. The psychology of the sniper is a terrifying thing. You have to shut down the part of your brain that screams for self-preservation. You have to lower your heart rate. He closed his eyes for a second, inhaling through his nose, exhaling through his mouth. In, out, in, out. He became part of the stone, part of the cold. The isolation was absolute. There was no radio, no backup, no promise of rescue, just him and the approaching storm. Then the world shifted. The birds had long since stopped singing, but now the heavy rhythmic thud of marching boots vibrated through the floor. The first wave. They emerged from the mist like specters, gray coats blending into the gray fog. They were relaxed, too relaxed. They had their rifles slung over their shoulders. They were talking. One of them lit a cigarette. They believed the intelligence reports. They believed the sector was clear. They were walking right into the center of his mental grid. The sniper watched them through the crosshairs. He didn't track the first man. He tracked the sergeant, the one waving his arm, directing the flow. Kill the head, and the body falters. He exhaled one last time, his lungs emptying until there was a natural pause in his breath cycle. The world narrowed down to a single point of focus, the intersection of the crosshairs on a gray uniform. The silence of the forest was heavy, pregnant with violence. His finger curled. The pressure mounted. And then the silence broke. The crack of the first shot didn't just kill a German soldier. It rang a dinner bell for every predator in the valley. The forest, previously frozen in a stalemate, instantly woke up. Machine gun fire began to rake the lower levels of the tower, chewing through the brickwork, sending dust and shrapnel raining down. But the sniper didn't care about the machine guns. They were spraying and praying, firing blindly at the sound. He knew the real danger was silent. He knew that somewhere in that dense, gray tree line there was a counterpart, a German sniper, a Scharfschütze, an elite hunter trained to look for one thing and one thing only, the muzzle flash. This is the physics of death and sniper warfare. When a high-powered rifle is fired, the expanding gases ignite as they leave the barrel, creating a distinct, sharp burst of light, a miniature lightning bolt. It lasts for a fraction of a second, but to a trained eye, it is a lighthouse beam in the dark. It says, "I am here. Kill me." The sniper knew that the moment he took his next shot, he would sign his own death warrant. The German optics were superior. Their patience was legendary. If he stuck his barrel out of a window and fired, a 7.92 millimeters Mauser round would tear through his scope and into his eye before he could cycle the bolt. He was pinned. He couldn't move. He couldn't shoot. And the infantry was inching closer. This was the moment where training ends and genius begins. This was where the matchbox became more lethal than the rifle. He crawled on his belly, keeping below the window line, moving toward the eastern side of the tower, a position he had already deemed too exposed to shoot from. It was a suicide window, perfectly framed for a German counter-sniper, and that was exactly why he needed it. He pulled out the matchbox. His hands, though numbed by the biting cold, worked with the precision of a watchmaker. He wasn't just lighting a match. He was building a decoy. He took a handful of dry moss and a strip of fabric torn from his own uniform, fashioning a crude, slow-burning fuse. He wedged a cluster of matches into a crack in the masonry, positioning them so that when they flared, the light would reflect off a shard of broken glass he had propped up nearby. The setup was ingenious in its simplicity. The glass would magnify the flare of the matches, mimicking the sharp, white-hot intensity of a rifle's muzzle flash. He lit the end of the fabric strip. The flame caught, glowing angry orange, eating its way slowly toward the sulfur heads of the matches. He had seconds. He scrambled backward, crab-walking across the debris-strewn floor, putting two solid stone walls between himself and the trap. He dove into his firing position, a small, jagged hole in the wall 20 feet away from the decoy. He settled the stock of his M1903 Springfield into his shoulder, inhaled and waited. The seconds stretched into hours. He watched the tree line through his scope, his eyes burning from the strain, scanning for the unnatural shape of a helmet or the glint of a lens. He forced himself to blink, to keep his vision sharp. The fuse was burning down. 10 seconds. 5, 3, flash. The matches ignited with a sudden, brilliant hiss of light. The reflection off the glass shard cut through the gloomy twilight, a perfect imitation of a sniper taking a shot from the eastern window. The reaction was instantaneous. From the deep shadows of the pines, a German sniper took the bait. A single, crisp crack echoed across the valley. A bullet slammed into the eastern window, pulverizing the stone exactly where the matches had flared a split second before. It was a perfect shot, and it was a fatal mistake, because to take that shot, the German had to reveal himself. For the briefest of moments, a muzzle flash blossomed in the dark canopy of the trees, like a sinister flower. It was a small, yellow-white burst, but to the American sniper, it was a neon sign. He saw it. He saw the disturbed leaves. He saw the ghost. He didn't hesitate. His brain processed the coordinates instantly. Elevation, windage, distance. His crosshairs snapped to the location of the enemy flash. He didn't look for a body. He fired at the flash. The Springfield kicked against his shoulder. A thunderclap in the small room. Down in the forest, the German sniper slumped forward, his rifle falling from the tree stand. The trick had worked. But there was no time to celebrate. The sound of his real shot had now given away his true position, and the infantry was moving up. But he had the rhythm now. He had the method. He crawled to the next window, matchbox in hand. He would make them shoot at Ghost until they ran out of bullets or he ran out of matches. The game of cat and mouse had turned. The mouse had fangs. He set another trap, this time using a tension wire rigged to strike the match against the box when pulled. He was turning the tower into a funhouse of false signals. The Germans were fighting a phantom battalion, wasting their ammunition on flickering lights and broken glass. And every time they fired at a shadow, he was there, waiting in the darkness, the Reaper with a rifle. One by one, the muzzle flashes appeared in the trees. One by one, they were extinguished. They were falling for the oldest trick in the book, reinvented by a man they thought wasn't smart enough to fight. He wasn't just holding the line. He was rewriting the rules of engagement. Day 1 bled into Day 2, and the tower became a slaughterhouse. The Germans were no longer advancing with the arrogance of conquerors. They were moving with the skittish terror of prey. To them, the crumbling stone structure wasn't housing a single man. It was a fortress manned by a phantom regiment. The sniper moved like quicksilver. He would fire from the bell tower, drop down a level, strike a match in a hallway to draw fire, and then reappear at a basement window to take another shot. The rhythm was hypnotic and deadly. Crack, shift, strike, wait, kill. Crack, shift, strike, wait, kill. The body count began to rise in a way that defied logic. 10, 20. The forest floor was littered with field gray uniforms, motionless against the white snow and black mud. The Germans screamed orders that made no sense, convinced they were flanked, convinced they were outnumbered. They wasted thousands of rounds shredding empty rooms where a match flaring had tricked them into seeing a ghost. For 48 hours the sniper was a god of war, untouchable and omniscient. But gods don't bleed and gods don't sleep. Men do, and the bill for his impossible stamina was coming due. By the dawn of the third day, the adrenaline that had been fueling him began to turn into poison. His body was eating itself, 96 hours without real rest. The cold had seeped past his skin and into his marrow, making his joints grind like rusted gears. His eyes, pressed against the scope for days, felt like they were filled with sand. The hallucinations started as whispers. At first, it was just the wind sounding like his mother's voice calling him home. Then the shadows in the corner of the room began to detach themselves. He would snap his rifle toward a movement in the periphery, heart-hammering, only to realize it was a trick of the fatigue-addled brain. A coat rack became a German officer. A falling beam became a grenade. He was fighting two wars now, the one against the Germans outside, and the one against his own collapsing physiology inside. And then the click, the most terrifying sound in the world. He pulled the trigger on a perfect target, and the firing pin hit empty brass. He was dry. His Springfield, the extension of his arm, was now just a club. He had used every round, every scrap of ammo he had carried up those stairs. Below him, the Germans were regrouping, sensing the lull in fire. Desperation brings a clarity that sanity cannot. He didn't retreat. Instead, he did the unthinkable. Under the cover of the screaming wind and the approaching darkness, the sniper left the safety of the tower. He crawled out into the kill zone, slithering over the freezing mud toward the bodies of the men he had killed. It was a macabre harvest. He rolled over a dead German corporal, his hands shaking violently, fumbling with the webbing. He stripped the dead man of his Mauser rifle, his ammunition pouches, and a jagged trench knife. He crawled back to his nest, dragging the enemy's weapons with him. Now he was fighting them with their own steel. The report of the German rifle confused the enemy even further. Why were their own guns firing from the tower? Was it friendly fire? Mutiny? The chaos bought him another night, but the end was closing in. Day 4 broke with a sound that vibrated in his teeth. It wasn't the crack of rifles or the chatter of machine guns. It was a low, mechanical growl that shook the foundations of the tower. The ground trembled. From the misty tree line, the shape of doom emerged. A tank. Its tracks chewed up the earth, spitting out mud and snow. Its main gun traversing slowly, looking for the fly that had been buzzing in the ear of the Wehrmacht for 4 days. Infantry swarmed behind it, confident now, hiding behind the armored beast. They were done playing games. They were done hunting. They were here to demolish. The sniper watched the monster approach. He had a rifle. They had a cannon. The math was finally impossible. He was cornered. The tank stopped 400 yards out. The turret rotated. He knew what was coming. A high explosive shell that would vaporize the top of the tower and him along with it. He had one card left to play, one last desperate gamble. He looked at the matchbox. Only 2 matches left. He didn't look at the tank. He looked at the commander. The hatch of the tank was open, just a crack. The commander confident enough in his armor to peek out, directing the gunner to the target. The sniper knew he couldn't penetrate the tank's armor, but flesh is soft. He needed the commander to expose himself fully. He needed 1 second of curiosity. He grabbed a handful of dry straw and his last strip of cloth. He ran to the far side of the exposed roof, a place where he would be visible to the naked eye if he stood up. He rigged the bundle. This wasn't a subtle flicker. This was a bonfire. He struck the penultimate match. The straw caught. He kicked the burning bundle off the roof. It tumbled down the side of the tower, a flaming meteor against the gray stone. It was primal. It was movement. It was fire. The tank commander, seeing the burning debris fall, instinctively popped his head up higher to see if the enemy was jumping or fleeing. It was a human reaction, a fatal curiosity. In the chaotic noise of the engine, the commander didn't hear the bolt of the stolen Mauser slide forward. The sniper, breathless, his vision tunneling, his body screaming in agony, leveled the German rifle. He didn't feel the cold anymore. He didn't feel the hunger. He felt only the trigger. The commander's head filled the iron sights. The tank's main gun began to elevate, locking onto the tower. It was a race between a bullet and a shell. The sniper exhaled, a ragged, broken breath. He squeezed. The shot hit the commander square in the chest. He slumped forward, jamming the hatch. The tank crew panicked, the gun jerking upward as the commander's body fell onto the controls. The shell fired, but it screamed harmlessly over the roof of the tower, exploding in the forest behind. The infantry froze, watching their leader die. In that moment of paralyzed shock, the sniper didn't wait to see his handiwork. He didn't wait for the second shell. He dropped the rifle. He grabbed the matchbox, now empty save for 1 burnt stick, and vanished into the rubble of the stairwell, slipping away into the shadows of the basement, just as the world above him turned to fire. He had held them for 96 hours. He had bled them white, and now, like the ghost they feared he was gone. The silence that followed the tank shell was heavier than the war itself. When the American reinforcements finally broke through the German line and reached the base of the tower, they didn't come charging in with guns blazing. They walked in with their mouths open. They had expected a firefight. They had expected to find a besieged company of men hanging on by their fingernails. Instead, they walked into a morgue. The valley floor was a tapestry of devastation. The snow, once pristine and white, had been churned into a slush of mud and frozen blood. German bodies lay in heaps, frozen in the twisted postures of violent death. There were bodies by the creek, bodies in the open field, bodies draped over the fallen logs where the sniper had predicted they would step. The relieving troops moved through the carnage with a sense of superstitious awe, counting the dead. 10, 50, 100. The count kept rising. 119 confirmed kills. They approached the ruined tower, weapons raised, expecting to find the remnants of a squad, maybe a platoon of elite rangers who had pulled off this miracle. They cleared the rubble of the ground floor, shouting for survivors. There was no answer. They moved up the shattered staircase, stepping over shell casings that carpeted the floor like brass gravel. And there, sitting against a wall that was more whole than stone, they found him. He wasn't the giant, mythical hero they had conjured in their minds. He was a man, curled in on himself, shivering violently from hypothermia and exhaustion. His uniform was in tatters, stiff with dried blood and grime. In his hands he clutched the empty German Mauser, his knuckles white, his fingers locked around the wood as if letting go meant dying. He didn't look up when they entered. He was staring at a point 1,000 miles away, seeing things that the fresh troops could not imagine. The lieutenant in charge of the relief column walked up to him. He looked at the sea of German bodies outside. Then he looked at the solitary figure before him. The math didn't make sense to him. It defied his training, his experience, and, most importantly, his prejudice. He knelt down, shaking the sniper's shoulder. "Soldier," he barked, his voice loud in the quiet room. "Report. Where's the rest of your unit? Where are the others?" The sniper blinked, slowly returning to the present. He looked at the officer with eyes that were ancient and hollow. He licked his cracked lips and whispered, "There aren't any others, sir. Just me." The lieutenant stood up, brushing the dust off his knees, a look of incredulity and disdain washing over his face. "Don't lie to me, soldier," he snapped. "I see a battalion's worth of dead Krauts out there. You expect me to believe you did this? You?" The emphasis on the word "you" hung in the air like a slur. It was inconceivable to the officer that a black man, a soldier from a segregated unit, deemed intellectually and temperamentally inferior by the War Department, could possess the tactical genius and the lethal precision to dismantle a German assault single-handedly. It was easier for the lieutenant to believe in a phantom squad that had deserted than to accept the reality standing in front of him. He ordered his men to search the area again, convinced that the real heroes were hiding or dead nearby. But they found no one else, just the sniper, just the matchbox. The tragedy of the moment wasn't just in the disbelief. It was in the erasure. In a just world, this man would have been hoisted onto shoulders. He would have been flown back to Washington. The president would have hung the Medal of Honor around his neck, and his face would have been on every newspaper from New York to San Francisco. But this was 1944, and the hero was the wrong color. The cognitive dissonance of the white officers turned into bureaucratic violence. The report of the action was written, but the tone was skeptical. The body count was accurate. They couldn't hide the 119 bodies, but the credit was diluted. Phrases like confused enemy advance and lucky positioning replaced tactical brilliance and unparalleled marksmanship. While white soldiers who had done a fraction of what he achieved were being rotated home to sell war bonds and kiss babies, the sniper was stripped of his captured weapons. He was patted on the back, given a hot meal, and then ordered back to his proper place. He was returned to a support unit. The man who had held off a tank and an entire infantry battalion was handed a ladle and told to peel potatoes. He was sent back to drive trucks. He was made invisible. The army wanted his victory, but they didn't want his face. They buried the story under mountains of paperwork. The files regarding the Matchbox stand were misfiled, redacted, or simply ignored, shoved into the back of a damp cabinet in the Pentagon archives. He returned home not to a hero's welcome, but to the crushing weight of Jim Crow, to a country that wouldn't let him drink from the same water fountain as the men he had saved. He grew old in silence, watching the history books written without his name. watching Hollywood make movies about the war where faces like his didn't exist. The world moved on. The water in the creek ran clear again, washing away the red. The forest grew back over the craters. The silence of history swallowed him whole. Or so they thought. Because paper rots and memories fade, but the truth is a stubborn thing. It waits in the dark like a sniper, waiting for the right moment to step into the light. Decades passed. The snow melted in the Hurtgen forest, revealing the scarred earth beneath. The trees grew back, covering the shrapnel wounds in their bark with new layers of wood. The bunker where the sniper made his stand crumbled into a ruin, overgrown with moss and forgotten by the locals. For a long time it seemed that the erasure was complete. The War Department had done its job efficiently. The man was a ghost, a footnote, a statistic in a dusty filing cabinet. But truth is a resilient seed. It lies dormant in the soil of history, waiting for the right season to break through the surface. Slowly the whispers began to grow louder. Veterans on their deathbeds told stories they had kept secret for 50 years. Discharged officers, haunted by the guilt of their silence, began to speak of the angel of the tower. Historians, digging through the redacted anomalies of battle reports, found the impossible numbers: 119 kills, 1 man, 4 days. The math that had once been dismissed as a fabrication was finally recognized for what it was, a miracle. It wasn't a ceremony on the White House lawn that brought him back to us. It wasn't a parade. It was the undeniable weight of his deed refusing to stay buried. We look back now at the image we started with Richard Overton, sitting on his porch, smoking his cigar, bathed in the golden light of a century well lived. He represents the grace of survival. We celebrate him because he is the tangible link to a past we can still touch. He is the man who made it home. But the story of the sniper teaches us that there is another side to that coin. For every Richard Overton who lives to be 112, there is a man whose entire existence was compressed into a singular blinding moment of violence and genius. Our sniper didn't get the century of peace. He got 4 days of hell. He didn't get the cigar on the porch. He got the matchbox in the freezing cold. And yet, without the ghost in the forest, there might not be a world for the old men to rest in. His legacy is not etched in marble monuments or bronze statues. It is etched in the lives of the men who retreated that day and survived to have children and grandchildren. It is etched in the very tactic itself, the matchbox trick, a piece of battlefield improvisation. That proved that ingenuity is the deadliest weapon of all. He proved that a man is not defined by the rank on his collar or the color of his skin, but by the steady beat of his heart when the tank tracks are grinding the earth above his head. He reminds us that the greatest heroes are often the ones who are never thanked, the ones who walk away from the fire, drop the gun, and disappear into the night, leaving only the silence of the saved behind them. We are living in an age where these stories are finally being exhumed. But the archives are deep, and the shadows are long. How many other files are rotting in the dark? How many other acts of impossible bravery were swept under the rug because the hero didn't fit the poster? History is a puzzle with missing pieces, and we are running out of time to find them. If you believe that these ghosts deserve a voice, if you believe that the man with the matchbox deserves to be known, then you are part of the solution. We have to tell these stories before the last memory fades into the static. Subscribe, share, and help us shine a light on the forgotten. Because the war is over, but the fight for the truth never ends. The screen goes black, the wind dies down. There is a pause, heavy and pregnant with meaning. Then, in the absolute darkness, you hear it, the sharp, scratchy sound of a single match striking against the side of a box, a flare of sound in the void, and then silence.